And also you play around with Linux, which I occasionally toy with.
Okay.
But either as a host or as or probably as a guest, I might want to go forward with that. But I think the
Okay.
browser is very important to me. I don't expect before I retire to get the Citrix access, but the browser, that's
Okay.
important. Okay.
Okay. David?
I'll work on that website. And, I mean, that's kind of fun, actually. It just a little tedious and takes time, but,
That's not specifically OS2 related, though.
well, getting the plumbing to work, that, figuring out where I would find things, all that was OS2 specific. And then, just development stuff.
Getting back to
Started playing
OpenVPN.
around with the C++ stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, Qt, I did actually get some programs to build using CMake with Qt5.
Okay.
So that's actually, I'm kind of interested in doing some stuff with that.
Good. Good. Great. Doug?
Good question. I guess what I hope for ArcaOS is that the Windows 2 part becomes a little more stable and consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean is it behaves differently on different hardware. And I don't know if that's ever something that can be fixed because the machines are so different now because of the UEFI, because how the UEFI is implemented and how the motherboards are set up and stuff like this.
I would invite you to open tickets for us about behavior that you see with WinOS 2
Okay.
under that environment. It has not been heavily tested. Generally, on the test team, we do the install, we fire up WinOS 2, and yeah, it opens, and I can open up the main folder in Program Manager, and I can get to the Print Manager.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it is.
Yeah.
We don't do a lot of heavy installing of Windows 3.1 apps, other than testing a couple of games to make sure that the video plays right.
Yeah.
So yeah, the more feedback we get on that, the better.
Yeah, and I realize that there's a tension here between, writing device drivers and getting Wi-Fi working and stuff like that, and Windows 2.
All these things have a place in the pecking order.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of where that place may be.
I just want to say once again that I am amazed at how well it does behave based on the hardware challenges that exist.
You
Yeah.
mean WinOS 2 or
Yeah.
OS 2 in general?
Well, OS 2 in general and WinOS 2 specifically, because seeing it on different machines, I'm getting the idea that WinOS 2 is a particularly difficult animal to get working correctly.
Well, you've got the DOS layer itself, and then you've got the graphical part on
Yes.
top of that
Yes.
that really complicates matters.
And what I'm seeing is there are some applications that run fabulously on it,
Mhm.
and on the exact same machine, there are other applications that run terrible, and you take those same two applications and put them on a different machine, and you get different results. So obviously, one of those applications is doing some unusual things
Right.
down with hardware that were unanticipated or whatever.
Yeah. That may require us to make some of our logging more robust.
It's
But
kind
it-
of like a whack-a-mole thing because,
Unfortunately, some of it is, but a test log on each of the systems would help us compare and contrast. This one doesn't behave well, this one does behave well. What's different in the configuration?
Yeah.
What's different in the hardware? And what might it be that ANCS is not fully emulating so that the system isn't struggling to try to find hardware that it expects to be there?
Now, my personal environment, if I'm at a desktop, then the browser isn't an issue for me because I just switch over to a Windows
Mhm.
session. If I'm running a laptop, that becomes a different issue.
Right.
And then I guess if I were doing a laptop enough, I'd probably look at VM,
Mhm.
virtual means some kind of virtual machine on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I would add to what I said that I've been playing around with the VM stuff, and
Mhm.
it really works well.
Mhm.
That's another thing.
You know, one of the other options that we have for a browser is sort of an offshoot of the whole running virtual machine, VirtualBox host on ArcaOS and running a slim Linux installation in that host would be to essentially containerize
Yeah.
a Linux or Windows browser and then run the whole thing virtually. So we wouldn't have any browser stuff to do. We would just have that containerization level
Yeah.
in between so that we could run that virtual Linux distribution in there. And I say Linux because Linux is
Probably a better
free
choice. Yeah.
and more secure.
Yeah.
So
And then if you
that's
could
another.
take the frame off of it,
Yeah, exactly,
off the
exactly,
window, then it becomes like a seamless OS2 window.
exactly.
And, you know, I would think that that would actually be a better long-term solution, because then all you have to do is worry about the VM session. You
Right.
have to worry about whatever the
Exactly.
latest standards are,
Exactly.
HTML and stuff like that.
So that's another option for us to explore, and it might be less human resource intense for us to go that route than to build a native browser that's going to run stably on ArcaOS.
And I've run some different Windows applications in VirtualBox
Mm-hmm.
under ArcaOS, and they work pretty well.
You mean under Windows in the VM?
As ArcaOS is a host.
Oh, the other backwards. Oh,
Yeah,
backwards.
backwards.
Mhm.
Now, you know, when you're looking at trying to run ArcaOS on a laptop that has some specific things, then you probably want to go the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got ArcaOS and you're trying to get a browser or a specific app running, VBox, if you can get it started, actually works fairly well.
Fairly well.
Yeah.
What would really solve the problem for us in multiple situations? Because all the new hardware that comes out has the capacity for much more RAM than we can ever use for anything useful. I mean, yes, the RAM disk is terrific, but how big a RAM disk do you really need?
Yeah.
So if you have a laptop that's got 64 gigabytes of RAM in it, how big a RAM disk do you need? I mean, do you need a 60 gigabyte RAM disk? But if we could get VirtualBox, if we could get PAE working for that application, because that's the big challenge with PAE, besides implementing PAE, programmable address extensions, where 32-bit operating systems can access and utilize that memory above the 4 gigabyte boundary. Applications have to be written to take advantage of that. So if we could do that in the VirtualBox host, where you could run a VirtualBox guest machine essentially above and outside of the ArcaOS host memory area. So you're
Yeah.
not carving into that small 4 gigabytes that we have.
That opens up a whole world.
It does. And then you've got a virtual Linux machine running in essentially 60 gigabytes of space for the browser.
Yeah.
And that would really make a difference. That's no mean feat by itself. I mean, when you think about how many man hours it will likely take to get a stable modern browser running before you have to maintain it on the platform, because it's not just a matter of getting the browser running, by the time the browser's running, they're already
Working on something different.
upstream from us 2, 3, 4, 10 versions ahead.
Like Rust or some other stupid.
Exactly. So now you've got to catch up and make sure that when you catch up, you're still stable. It's a constant behind the times thing trying to catch up. So there's a tremendous amount of manpower. It would require a tremendous amount of man hours to do something like what I just proposed. But the question is, in the long run,
Where's it
which
better spent?
which is better spent for us?
I mean, the other way around seems much more a better choice, using Linux or Windows as
The
host,
containerized solution.
yeah.
Yeah, it's something that's run around the back of my head for a while, because as I say, really, it's funny. The virtual machine part of the whole thing sort of came about a number of years ago. Andy and I were discussing a problem that we were having in two different environments, but essentially the problem was we needed to get a VPN client running for the OS2 machine. So the client, the person, could connect to the office. And there was no native client for OS2, but there was a native client for Linux. And so we figured out how we could boot a thin Linux in a virtual machine and route the traffic from the host machine through the guest machine and then back out through the VPN. And so that solution worked for quite well for quite some time. But we were only running a VPN client in that Linux distribution.
Now that was running in a VM, or that was the host?
That was running the VM. So it was, at the time, eComStation, and that was running VirtualBox 1.6, Paul's port of VirtualBox 1.6 as the hypervisor. And in that, I was running SUSE Personal 9. So that was SUSE Linux Personal, which was pretty slim at the time. And so the virtual machine took up it was less than 256 megs of RAM in the virtual machine. And then it only had to come up to the desktop and run the VPN client. And that's what it did. And then we just adjusted the routing so I could route all the traffic to the internet through that virtual machine interface.
Now you could do that these days with Linux as the host OS, and then the OS2 could.
Well, yeah. There's no routing at that point because the host is already connected to the VPN.
Mm-hmm.
But in those cases, there was no other host operating system. eComStation was running natively on the hardware, on the bare metal. And so the problem was the opposite way around. How do I get from an operating system running on bare metal that has no VPN client for that particular type of VPN to connect to the VPN concentrator on the other side? Well, there was a Linux client. So how do I get my OS2 guest to go through the Linux client? Well, I started thinking about proxy servers. And Andy and I sort of independently came into this solution for the problem. And it worked. And it worked fairly well. I mean, now we didn't do any benchmarking of performance, but we got the traffic to flow. So there are solutions to problems that may not be immediately apparent, and they may not be particularly robust in terms of performance, but they do get the job done. And the clients that we had at the time who needed this solution, I think Andy needed it for himself so he could connect to work. I had a client who needed to do it. And everyone was satisfied with the results.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the ultimate test. Is it fast enough?
Is it, and with processors getting faster and faster,
A lot of that's been taken out of the picture entirely.
yeah.
The machine's not working so hard to make the connection go. So that's a one possible workaround for us. And then with the containerization thing, it could be other applications that aren't available for the platform. Certainly, as I say, for the browser, Linux would be my first choice. But 32 and 64-bit Windows applications, because you can run a 64-bit guest on a 32-bit host.
Can you?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. Your problem is accessing that memory. The 64-bit guest is going to be memory hungry. So
Okay.
you'd still be you would be constrained in that regard. But you can run a 64-bit guest operating system under a 32-bit host.
So I could put Windows 10 64-bit on a VirtualBox as a virtual.
As far as
Yes.
I know, yes.
Okay.
As far as I know, yes.
Interesting.
My initial reaction was, no, that won't work, but no, I was proven wrong at the time. So,
But you're right, the whole memory issue becomes, why would you do that?
yeah,
It seems upside down, that,
it does seem
doing it
upside
that
down.
way. 'Cause-
But
and
if
with
if
the
you
host-
roll into that the PAE support,
Uh-huh.
if we could, and that's a huge if. I mean, that's a gigantic if, because PAE support, it's like 3 little letters. How hard could it be, right?
Yeah.
It's really, really an Herculean task to bring that, to do something more than the RAM disk, right? But if we could do that in the VirtualBox host and get PAE support so that we could access that memory above the 4 gigabyte boundary, then the 64-bit guest would not be constrained, and you wouldn't have the issue.
So you have to write a VirtualBox driver or something to get
The
that?
VirtualBox host software itself would need to be written to take advantage of programmable address extensions.
Because it pops up as an option on this, when you're defining a machine.
Right, when you're
There's a
defining a
checkbox
machine,
for it.
yeah,
But-
exactly. Because remember, in VirtualBox, whether you're running a 32-bit version of VirtualBox or a 64-bit version of VirtualBox, it will give you all of those options for the guests. But the VirtualBox host machine itself is what I'm talking about here, not your guest configuration. The guest configuration, if you're running a 64-bit operating system, you should not need to enable PAE because PAE is specifically for 32-bit operating systems that can take advantage of addresses above the 4 gigabyte boundary. 64-bit operating systems already can access that memory.
But if you're running ArcaOS in a VM and I have a 64-bit Linux, and I check that box, that's still not going to make that memory available because where does the code have?
Whether it's available to it or not, it doesn't really matter. In other words, the operating system, the guest operating system has to be able to access it.
And OS2, ArcaOS cannot do that, period.
ArcaOS can do that to a very limited extent. When we create the RAM disk,
Uh-huh.
we can create the RAM disk in high memory. So I don't know whether if you've configured a RAM disk in your ArcaOS guest on that platform,
I don't know, I don't.
you may
think so.
need to check that PAE box to give it more memory. But if you've only assigned 4 gigabytes to the guest machine, then PAE
Yeah, I
is
did because I thought, why
right.
give it anymore, but
But if you bump that RAM up to 8 gigabytes, let's say, and then you checked off the box for PAE, then my understanding is that you would have 4 gigabytes available for your RAM disk above the 4 gigabyte boundary.
well, maybe we could try that.
But you'd need to have that box checked off.
Mhm. And the RAM disk, that's something you can just, how do you do that?
There's a utility. It's on your system configuration. Is a
System
system
setup.
configuration folder for the RAM disk, and you can tell it to use low memory, high memory, a mix of both, and limit how much you're using, and then set up your disk drive configuration, whether you want FAT or HPFS format.
You know, I wonder what the performance would be if you routed the swapper file to the RAM disk. I mean, you say what good is
Well,
4
we do
gigabytes.
very little swapping these days. And the drives in the machines are solid state anyway.
They are.
There is very little difference when you put the swap file on the RAM disk versus leaving the swap file on the SSD.
Unless you're talking virtual memory, isn't it? So, I mean, the 4 gigabyte limitation is really a virtual.
It's 4
It's
gigabytes of space, yes.
It's both the virtual and the.
Correct.
and-
So if you have a 2 gigabyte machine like my T43,
Yeah,
my swap file can only grow to 2 gigabytes.
yes.
Because then I've hit 4 gigabytes and I'm out of memory.
Yeah, but if we're going back to the ArcaOS 2, ArcaOS host to a virtual machine that's running Linux, that's running the browser in it,
Yeah.
if you ran the swapper to, since you're limited to 4 gigabytes, I'm assuming that when the browser inside this client
Mm-hmm.
gets hungry, that it's going to start swapping.
It will use up to the amount of memory that you've configured for the guest operating system.
Yeah, so if you configure, so when it hits the limit, can you configure more for the guest than what the host machine has?
No. No.
Could you do that and swap it?
No.
Okay,
But if we had PAE support,
you could. Okay,
it takes that problem out of the equation.
okay.
And what happens is, just like back in the day, Novell had a product called NetWare for OS2. And essentially what it did was it ran a NetWare server on the same hardware as the OS2 machine. So you got a workstation running OS2, and you got what we call the non-dedicated NetWare server. What it did was partition the memory. So if you had an OS2 workstation that had 2 gigabytes of RAM in it, and you say, I want my NetWare server to have 1 gigabyte of RAM, then it literally partitioned the memory, and you had 1 gigabyte for OS2 and 1 gigabyte for NetWare. The problem is always that 4 gigabytes is it. That's the limit,
Yeah.
no matter what you want to do with it. So if you've got 4 gigabytes in the machine, and you configure a guest in VirtualBox to use 2 gigabytes of RAM, that lowers your host OS RAM to 2 gigabytes. Once that guest fires up, 2 gigabytes is sucked up by the guest.
But if you did PAE, you could.
If you had PAE support in the VirtualBox host, it could then take advantage of that RAM above the 4 gigabyte boundary, and we have
Raise the limit.
yeah, I mean, we literally have taken the ceiling off
Yeah.
of the whole thing. And that would be, from my perspective, a better route to take. The problem that we have with PAE is that everything that needs to utilize it must be written to utilize it. In other, it's not like an automatic thing. It's like people say, will there be a 64-bit OS2? It's not just a matter of compiling the kernel in 64 bits to understand 64 bits of memory addresses. Every application that runs under it has to be written to take advantage of 64 bits. Otherwise, you're still running a 16 or a 32-bit application under a 64-bit kernel. So
What's the point?
it's a it's a net sum game. So here we're talking about one application, the VirtualBox host, being PAE enabled.
How stable is the PAE interface or API?
Well, I've not had one report of anyone who's had a RAM disk just fail for some reason. So in that regard, in that very limited application of it, it seems to be very stable. But it's a RAM disk. I mean, I don't know whether we would expose other potential issues with it. But that would be, I mean, if I were the one directing the effort behind a new browser solution, I would focus my attention there.
That would appear to me to be the better.
It seems to make the most sense. And then when there's a new browser version, you just update the browser version in that VM.
Just
And,
because we know the history, the browsers go to very.
and let someone else do the
14.
browser work. Exactly. And then we really have a choice of browsers.
Yeah.
We're not stuck using a browser that we don't really like. So there's that. There's that. So that's kind of my position on the browser problem. As I say, even without the PAE extensions, we would be no worse off than we are now if we get a native browser, because a native browser is still going to be limited to 4 gigabytes.
Yeah.
So there you have it.
So in the system setup, this RAM disk thing is the one that you?
Yes, yes.
Oh.
High disk, I think, is the
So I
name of the
enabled
application.
that PAE and I have 8 gigs.
You have 8 gigs in the guest right now.
Yes.
Okay. Martin, do you want to tell us how you envision using ArcaOS
Yes.
or OS2 in the future?
Well, not my vision. It's like what users like for the short term future.
Mhm.
What users mostly complain on the forums everywhere is modern browser and Wi-Fi drivers. That is the
Modern
short-term-
browser and Wi-Fi drivers.
Yeah, they have like the laptop that is working, ArcaOS installed, but I want Wi-Fi drivers. It's like the only component that I really want, but I'm missing. No, there are other things missing, Bluetooth, webcam, but the going through the hardware is Wi-Fi drivers. That's what
We've
mostly
sort of spoiled people about network drivers
Yeah.
because the Multimac framework that David has developed is extremely robust for dropping in other wired network drivers. The framework is flexible enough that when a new device comes along, he can generally just take that FreeBSD code and drop it in, compile it, and we end up with a driver for another chipset or family of chipsets. Wi-Fi is a whole, not just another layer of complexity, several other layers of complexity on top of that. And the Multimac framework, as I understand it, does not lend itself well to dealing with those Wi-Fi drivers, which means that those Wi-Fi drivers need to be natively developed. And there is a lot of work that has to go into that. Now, David could stop doing everything else and just focus on Wi-Fi drivers, which is a grueling task because there literally are very few short-term rewards along the way when you're developing a Wi-Fi driver. You know, you can't just work for the whole day and say, oh, look at what I got working today. No, it's just a slog, up the hill, slide down in the mud, slog, until you finally get something happening. So that's why, and there are workarounds to the Wi-Fi problem. People don't like to think about the workarounds, but we've got a workaround going right up here. Did you hear me at any one time today say, I wish that the Wi-Fi in this box was supported? No, because there's a workaround for it.
Yeah, there are workarounds, but yeah, laptops are no longer coming with Ethernet ports, and you have to put like, okay, we have like USB
That's true.
Ethernet, and we have like USB to Ethernet, and we have the Ethernet to Wi-Fi.
That's true. Yes,
So,
I agree with you. It is an extra layer. People don't want to carry around extra stuff with them. So I understand that there is a desire for these things. I also remember what the desire was for USB 3. And when is USB 3 coming in? I need USB 3. Then we got USB 3 and everyone said, oh, USB 3 is great. But you know, I don't have any devices that use USB 3. So USB 3 became more of a concern when laptops weren't shipping with USB 2 at all. But most of the better laptops have USB 2 and USB 3 in them. Well, maybe not the latest crop of them, but it was a hard thing. And as a result of everyone's patience and waiting for that, we have a very stable and robust USB stack.
But you have to remember that when you like accomplish or get a driver for one thing, the list moves.
Yes.
So now, well, if the priority is now Wi-Fi, tomorrow you're going to say, okay, here's the Wi-Fi driver, the list is going to move. Say, okay, I now need Bluetooth keyboard.
Sure.
Yeah. So it depends, but well, or if something that's broken, that will be the priority list. If tomorrow a new BIOS show up, and that's that will change the priority list. But that's the two things that people mostly complain about. And the other stuff that is more personal that some people do not share with me is to have more love on the graphic user interface. There are like things like we require, there are very common on different operating systems, like little things like when you drop a window to one side of the screen and you grab like the half of the screen. That's because the screens turn into white. There are now white screens, and how to organize windows, that kind of stuff with the graphic user interface, and sometimes we have like the workplace shell mess when someone creates an object for that is a child of a different object, and it's a child of a different object, and then there's sometimes some confusions, like we need like standardize the classes.
Remember that the workplace shell is pretty much what it is. I know that sounds like word salad. The fact of the matter is, the workplace shell is not likely to change in its behavior at any time in the future. We don't have source code for it. Fixing it is, it has some flaws, long-standing flaws that will be with it forever. Unless some genius could come up with a work-alike drop-in replacement for the workplace shell, it is what it is. The best we can do is subclass various parts so that the subclasses behave differently. But under it all, you're going to get to points where you say, oh, I got to crash and PM merge.
Having said that, though, the workplace shell that exists today is flexible enough to probably do a lot of the things that you would like to see as user interface enhancements, like the dragging to the screen to the side. I mean, that's not much different than what's the little thing on the grid at the bottom where you have desktops?
The pager.
Yeah, the
X
pager.
pager.
It's not really that much different than the pager or the different hooks that they have. It's just getting somebody that's willing to dive into the prickly WPS development stuff.
Yeah, what I think is that we should like put more focus on X workplace and try to move that way to make it more, to put it more features to it, to X workplace, more than replacing the workplace shell.
Has anyone proposed any of these things to Rich? Because he's the one who's actively doing X workplace development right now.
Well, I can give it a try, but
You can always give it a
yeah,
try.
I can give it a try to the bridge, man.
Always give it a try. Subclassing things and coming up with different ways to use the workplace shell is always a good thing. Let me rephrase that. It's not always a good thing to subclass things. But when you can't fix something, for instance, I talked yesterday about the desktop properties background page. It's so broken in so many different places, we can't fix it. But we could replace it by subclassing it, and you'd have a different page there instead. So in that instance, replacing it is better than fixing it, because we can't fix it, really. We can't effectively fix it. Sometimes people want to subclass things just for the sake of subclassing things. And then you can just end up with a mess that wasn't really required. So it's not always best to subclass things, but the workplace shell gives us the flexibility to do that if that makes sense to do it.
Yeah, the big problem with replacing, for instance, the properties that you talked about is if you subclass it and come up with something new, then you have to rewrite the code for all the stuff that's existing in there.
Yeah,
That you want to put into your new class, and that can be,
exactly. You have to duplicate all of that
and
functionality.
it can be a challenge just figuring out
Yep,
where it is and what exactly it's doing.
absolutely, absolutely. And stabilizing dynamic icons and having that work as well as it does now from where it started, its humble beginnings, that was, Rich spent a pretty good amount of time on that.
Yeah, I can believe it.
And it shows. I mean, it's excellent work, but there's still more to be done. I mean, it's still not quite there, but you know, we discover odd things from time to time with it. There was something where you would change the properties for one view and they would automatically change the properties for the other view, even though they were two separate pages, and you wanted them to change independently. That wasn't in the code. That had to be re-implemented. So you add new pages. You have to make sure that the new pages you add work, and you have to make sure that they play within the rules.
He's probably the expert on the workplace shell now, isn't
He's probably the guy.
Now, I would say he's pretty much always been.
Yeah.
he? Well, you had some other people that were really good at it, but you don't see them anymore.
Well, Rich plays within the rules, so he doesn't rely on undocumented functions and things like that that can quickly get you into trouble. So it's refreshing that he codes that way, and you end up with stable code when you do that. So, as I say, the one thing about the workplace shell is that it's not going to be changing. So it's not like IBM is going to come out with a new release next year, and then if we relied on an undocumented function, that may not be there next year. No, that undocumented function is pretty much going to be as it is now, however it works.
Which is good and bad.
Exactly. Gordon, do you have anything to contribute as so far as what you want to be doing with
Yes,
OS2?
I do.
Go ahead.
3 things. The first one is I identify very strongly with the brand new user. Brand new.
Mm-hmm.
I have been using home computers since the mid-90s, and I have never yet burned a CD or a DVD. I'm going to have to learn how to do that when I download 5.1. So far, Neil has done my installs in this computer and my main desktop. I have a second desktop still running ECS. I'm going to try and install 5.1 on that when I get home. One thing I would like to see in the install package is a README first document that says, during this install, you will be asked the following questions. You will have to supply this bit of information, and you will have to supply a name for your workstation, and what drive you want to install on, all the steps, so I can have the information ready when I get to it.
Okay,
I don't have to abort the install to go find something out.
okay,
Yeah, because that question about naming your workstation threw me, because it just said name your workstation. Well, how many characters can I use? Is it
Case sensitive.
sensitive to case?
case,
What character set can I use to, things like that throw me.
Did-
The other thing is acronyms. For a brand new user, if they hit some acronyms like GPT and Samba and UEFI and so forth, they're gone if they don't know what they mean.
okay,
So I want to try pulling all those acronyms that I can find together and put them on a paper, define them all clearly, what the importance of them is, and have it ready for, and that's what I
Okay.
want. Oh, and I'm working on a presentation for Rex. It'll be another Warpstock like this. And for a brand new user, I can show you what I got after the meeting.
okay,
But that's for next.
okay,
Yeah, that's what I have
Okay.
to say.
excellent. Did you find that the online help in the install?
That's the other thing.
Yes.
Finding documentation.
Okay.
You say that ArcaOS is not responsible for explaining a lot of things. Would you bend enough to point people to where
Surely,
the
yes,
documentation is?
yes,
Okay.
yes. We never mind pointing people in the right direction.
Yes.
But pointing people is a far cry from maintaining that documentation ourselves.
Okay.
So, surely we are happy to expand our wiki to help people find what they need to find.
Okay.
I think the position is, it's not that we're not writing documentation, we do, hopefully we write helpful documentation, but that once the documentation is there is a certain expectation that it's going to be read.
Well, I will read it if I can find it.
Yeah, and quite often when we're having a staff meeting, the statement will be made, yes, but users don't read the manual. And then you think, and I'm spending how much time writing the manual that no one's going to read?
Yeah.
So there is that expectation that if we put some effort into it, it will be used at least by the people who need it. Because not everything is as simple as turning a doorknob and walking through the entryway.
Yeah.
Sometimes you actually have to learn about what the software does and how to make it do what you want it to do.
Part of the problem for me on finding documentation is, you inherited already created documentation for how the command processor works.
Yes.
And the convenience package and stuff like this. But then there's been all these new things that are added on, and as an innocent user, you sort of have the expectation that that's in the same location as all the other stuff.
Right,
And,
that's true.
And in fact, it's spread out over. So
Mhm.
part of the problem is just finding the documentation.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
the particular help screen.
exactly. I have a pet project that's hung around with me for a number of years now, and it is to rewrite and update a ton of the IBM documentation that came with OS2 Warp. Because a lot of it is either arcane by today's standards. I don't need to tell people to press and then release the enter key anymore. And we no longer refer to fixed disks as Winchester drives.
You don't?
I mean, it's even the concept of fixed disk. An SSD isn't even a disk. It has no moving parts.
Yeah.
It doesn't spin. It's not a disk of any sort. But updating that to more modern terminology and aligning the OS2 Warp documentation better with ArcaOS. But it's not really going to be an ArcaNoA project to do that. That would be a volunteer project of people.
And that's not a simple task either.
No, it's a huge task.
Unless you have the source to all those.
Just the Warp 4 command reference is a huge document.
Yeah.
Huge.
Those are INF files?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
can you suck that out, work on it?
You can decompile it, yeah. New View will give you an option to decompile. Now, that doesn't mean that the result of the decompile is
100%.
workable by itself, but it will give you the raw text that you can copy and paste into a new document that you're working on. Some of the formatting gets lost. Tables don't decompile quite right. Alex knows a lot more about the inner workings of New View now than most.
It's not just saying a great deal. my Pascal is not as polished as some of my other ones.
It is written in Pascal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Here's a
Civil.
suggestion.
speed soft civil.
Speed stuff.
How about if we had a DDE or some other interface to, I want to say Lucid, but you call it
Lucene.
Lucene, so that you could write documentation as a PDF,
Mm-hmm.
but then reference it. I mean, VirtualBox does a pretty good job of that. It's a huge PDF file, but when you're going through different areas of the graphical user interface for the host, you can click on help and it takes you to that spot in the PDF.
So, okay, so what you're proposing is a hyperlink from IPF to an external PDF.
Or some way of, yes, hyperlink from IPF or a program that you write, so that instead of putting a help panel number or label in your program that then goes to an IPF, you could put some kind of reference that then goes to a PDF.
So when you click the help link in the menu, or you use the context menu with the right mouse button click,
Yeah.
or press F1, instead of opening a help file, it would open a PDF
It'd open a PDF.
to
and
that
take you-
topic.
Yes, take you to the H reference or the A reference that the H reference is going to. And I've looked, Acrobat Reader
Mhm.
has a DDE interface to it, but it doesn't seem to be published what topic and what's a conversation and topic that you use in DDE to get to that. So and obviously they have something in there because it works for VBox.
Right, right.
So the people that wrote that documentation or the VBox GUI know how to get to that part of the PDF. So they know that if it's using DDE, whatever they're using, I don't know if they're making a special call to a DLL or
Well,
what.
the VBox GUI is written in Qt. So there may be a Qt, Alex, what are those called? Widgets? Is that what they're called? The Qt modules that do things are called widgets.
The graphical controls.
Yeah, the graphic
Yeah,
controls.
yeah.
So there may be something in Qt that allows you to do that.
But I'm trying to remember now, when you do, what's the thing where you set up your virtual machines in VBox? What do you call that? You know, where you create a virtual machine and you assign all the output, you know, configurations or set the PAE or something. When you click in there, it opens a PDF document. And I'm trying to remember which app it does. I thought it was Lucid. Lucid.
For reading PDFs. So in other words, on the OS2 VirtualBox host,
Yes.
when you click the help link there, it opens a PDF
Yes.
for the help.
And it takes you to the right spot on the PDF.
Interesting.
I'm trying to remember which app it does that, and for some reason I'm thinking it's Lucid.
Lucid. Well, it would, if it's a PDF, it would render it in Lucid. Although,
Well, I mean, Bitwise has been trying to replace Lucid with QPDF viewer. Right?
with QPDF viewer, yeah. I guess it would go to the system configured PDF viewer, default PDF
So
viewer.
whoever wrote Lucid, if that's what's being opened, must know how that interface works, because you're passing something to that to get it to go.
It's probably in the Poplar library. QPDF and Lucid use the Poplar library for rendering PDFs. But that's just that part of it. Making that work for other types of applications that aren't Qt
Yeah.
is a whole other thing.
Yes, for existing applications, that would be rather difficult.
Yeah.
You have to have something that translates from the OS2 help system to that if you wanted to replace
It would have to be a shim for
Yeah,
view.exe that instead of firing up new view would fire up Lucid and go to that topic in Lucid.
yeah.
Well, it's an interesting proposal.
Yeah, I mean, the advantage of PDF is it's much, you get much better tables and, I mean, the formatting is more controllable.
Yeah, it's definitely a more robust
Yeah.
documentation.
Disadvantage is it's not nearly as fast as,
It's much slower, it's not reformatable, it's not searchable.
well,
Oh, well, it depends. It may or may not be searchable,
depends on-
depending on the PDF, but
it depends on how
PDF
you
format
create
itself is not
yeah,
strong for being able to be searched.
yeah, you're right. It depends on how you create the PDF.
There is that. And of course, IPF does give you the ability to hyperlink to other things.
External things, yes.
Yeah. I don't know that it's easy in IPF to hyperlink to PDF, to other local applications. You can start other local executables. So you should be able to start an executable and then pass parameters to the executable.
Yeah, so if you got to your command reference, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
you could get to the bottom of more information for something like this and then take them to whatever else it is.
Right. So that's an interesting approach to do that. I hadn't thought about using something other than IPF all the way through. But yeah, there's a lot of the documentation that's just not quite up to 21st century standards. It was really written, some of it, was rehashed from OS2 1.0 in 1987.
Yeah.
And you read some of the things and you say, you want me to do what now? And with my Winchester disk? So it's kind of funny to read. And that by itself is a distraction. Jeff, what do you want to weigh in here on what you envision using the platform to do?
Sure, but I have a comment about this discussion. So we started out with the question that I think Gordon, mentioned about what a newbie does. So I'm not exactly a newbie, but I've been away from, my last experience was eComStation. I had a computer course. I'm just getting back, and so I come to these meetings to meet the people who know the answers. But my situation is similar to his, in the sense that there's no central list that if you're going to start this adventure, this is what you have to read before you turn the switch on.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't exist. And I would read those things. So I agree with you. They stopped giving out user manuals with things, including my smartphone. There's no user manual. There's no way to know how to use
Right.
the features in this phone. My stupid phone, the manual is 60 pages long. The manual for this should be 1,000 pages. Basically, there's a feature list that's given to the developers, and when they get done and they test it and everything works, you take the requirement that you sent to the developers, and then you give it to a technical writer, and he writes the manual, which documents every feature and has an index. Okay, they don't do that. I talked to T-Mobile. They said, just Google around. I said, my life's not organized. I can spend hours Googling around how to use this thing.
Right.
Like the camera thing. I couldn't get the camera to connect to the computer over the cable. I finally found somebody who knew the answer. He was a technician. He said, oh yeah, and he just plugged it in, and he says, you just have to put it in developer mode. I think I may have told you the story. And I said, where's it documented? He says, it's not documented anywhere. I said, how'd you find out? He said, I had a 3-week training course on this phone before they released it. There's no way to know these things. So I think for you, it would not be writing, spending months writing a manual. It would be somebody sitting down and spending a day saying, these are all the things you know. And it should start out with, you don't know anything about computers and the terminology, read this. That's the first thing Gordon reads. But if you know all that stuff and you're a computer aficionado, these are the things you need to know about the new operative. You need to read this, you need to read that, here's the install thing, and all the questions. And it doesn't have to give the answers to it. It just says, these are the following 25 resources with the hyperlinks. Read these before you load the ISO. I would have done that. But since that doesn't exist anywhere that I know of, I spent a lot of money to come here and meet my friends.
Have you visited the ArcaOS wiki?
No. I didn't know about the ArcaOS wiki. I mean, it may have been mentioned in something, but I didn't know it. There should just be a page.
The ArcaOS website has a resources link at the top, has a support link at the top, and under support is wiki. That's your first stop for information on ArcaOS and how to use it, how to install it, known issues, how to configure various portions of the operating system.
Okay, so that's interesting. I just wouldn't have thought to go to a wiki to find out about what to do when you're about to buy the pack.
That's where we put our fluid information. By fluid, I mean information that is likely to change from release to release. Because it's more efficient from a manpower perspective to use the wiki with the online documentation than it is to constantly update and generate new manuals.
I understand that, so
Yeah.
you just provide links to things. But
Right.
it wouldn't have occurred to me to go to a wiki, which you sort of think as, where people are chatting back and forth, something like that.
Well, people only chat in a wiki on the talk page. We don't even maintain that in our. We call it the wiki. It's a set of static pages on our website that function as a quasi-wiki. We call it the wiki, and it's referenced in the URL as wiki, arcaos.com/wiki. But it's essentially a series of web pages on our site that address these different issues as to how to download your ArcaOS ISO, how to create installation media, how to boot the system and install from the media. All of that to get you to the point of getting the machine up and running, so then you can press F1 in the installer to get help when you're going through the installer itself.
Okay, so that's fine. So I understand now, that's the place we should go on. Maybe Gordon didn't know about that. I don't know. But the question you addressed to me, my goal for the future is, I don't have any great aspirations. My
Okay.
goal for the future is the same as it is now. To get a functional system which I can install on some bare metal for some things I want to do. Like eventually I want to get the RC server on bare metal. In fact, I think what you were talking about yesterday, to put it on the virtual machine, maybe that wouldn't be visible. So I'm thinking, maybe
Right.
just give me the server and client. I brought a drive here, just put it on here.
Okay.
And I've got a machine that is bare metal.
Okay.
It's eComStation, but it works. And I'll just test on that. Okay, so my goal is to get the way I used to have, which is everything worked, all my old printers, all my old software,
Right.
Warpstock. The manual for Warpstock is 500 pages long. There are 3 manuals, actually. Somebody has put the whole thing up on the internet now. Somebody scanned all the pages,
Wow.
all these pages. I actually have the manuals. So I can run all my old stuff, but then I will have access to the things that don't work so well with my old hardware and software. So I'll have a modern browser. So this is why the virtualization thing is quite important. I'm going to exercise
Sure.
that now. So, but eventually, basically I'm decoupling from Microsoft. So at the moment I have Windows 7 as the platform for virtualization, but eventually I'll probably go to a Linux distribution
Okay.
and get as far away from Microsoft as I can. And I think that's a good selling point for you, because a lot of people, they want to get away from Microsoft, they want to get away from Google, and they want to get away from the cloud. So that's the way I'm organizing my life.
Okay.
To be independent, self-sufficient, and 100% bulletproof. That's my goal. And
Gotcha.
ArcaOS is a key feature
Gotcha.
of that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. How are we doing on time? Because I need
no,
to
very,
check out.
very
now.
bad. No.
Yes, but I need to check out. I still have 2 bags of
11.
It's, what's that?
11:25.
11:25, okay.
You probably ought to go.
Yep.
We'll wrap this up in the next 10 minutes and then I'll log it out.
Just some comments on.
Yes, please, that's the next
Yeah.
thing.
Neil is saying that it will be desired like a Samba server, an updated Samba server that require more love.
Okay,
And JT Angelo is talking about the solution of his ATOF project with WinFlector for virtualization and hosting. Says he says like, yeah, you can run Windows stuff like with virtualization and it's something like similar to what we were talking about. Yeah.
What
I want to look some more at that WinFlector thing.
What did Neil say? I'm sorry.
Neil said he's looking forward to the Samba 4 server.
Okay.
Yeah, Samba server. Yeah, that's what is have been discussed. Yeah.
See, my focus with ArcaOS is on running it on bare metal and how we can extend the functionality of running ArcaOS on bare metal without having to virtualize it under some other operating system. So while I realize that surely you could run Linux or Windows on bare metal and then install VirtualBox on that and install ArcaOS under that, that certainly is a solution, and some people are perfectly happy doing that. For me, the interest is in being able to run ArcaOS on the bare metal, boot the system into ArcaOS, so there's no other operating system involved, no other third party involved in doing that, and then be able to use ArcaOS to its fullest potential on that bare metal. And I know there are others who feel the same way. ArcaOS focus is on running ArcaOS. ArcaOS focus on running the operating system on bare metal. If it runs in a virtual machine, that's terrific, and we're very happy that people are able to utilize it in any way, shape, or form they do. But our focus is on running it on bare metal. Otherwise, we wouldn't be working on device drivers and everything else, because if the hypervisor can virtualize standard hardware already, and we already have drivers for that standard hardware, there's nothing for us to support. But for us, the interest, the driving interest is in running on bare metal. But that's fine, and I, as I say, I appreciate however people want to make use of the operating system. It's the limitations that we want to remove. That's the whole thing. However you want to use it, that would be a great thing to do. Are there other comments online about how people envision using the platform?
No, there. Well, sorry.
As a multimedia server, as a file server, as a print server platform, as a cloud substitute, such as Jeffrey proposes?
Not that. There's another comment about Jan-Erik Larka of his request of the web browser, and he also has interest in OOREX integrated with the workplace shell. Right? Yeah.
OOREX.
OOREX, yeah.
Integrated with the workplace shell.
Yeah.
I
Generic is a Rex developer, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I don't quite understand the question about integrating it with the workplace shell, though.
Yeah, well, it's just a quick comment there.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe we should write about it on the forum.
Yeah, that might be interesting, because I would need further clarification of that. When John Urbaniak stopped in yesterday, it was interesting because he actually asked me, "Oh, you still use Rex on ArcaOS?" And I thought, well, that's a funny question to ask. Doesn't everyone know that Rex is our native scripting language, and we use it for everything from getting the operating system installed to running our applications? This from the guy who wrote the book on learning and using Rex.
Oh, really?
Yeah, John wrote several books on Rex, and I learned Rex from his book on Teach Yourself Rex.
I thought object-oriented Rex already had a way of calling workplace shell classes, but maybe I'm confused.
I use Rex in the sense that if I have to tweak something in an existing Rex script, I can make an adjustment. Alex does a lot more with Rex than I do. Much more with Rex than I do. But I don't know that, Alex, I don't know that you actually call workplace shell functions from Rex. Is there a library that does that?
I mean,
Object-oriented
if I need to do anything, if I need to interface with the workplace shell itself, I'll use the Rex APIs that are available, like RexUtil or WP Tools. I've actually never used ObjectRex at all.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with what's available for ObjectRex at this point. Okay, have we, any more comments online?
No.
Okay, well, I have a pretty good idea. No comments on my thoughts about the containerization of the browser?
No.
I had thought for a while about it. Everyone's familiar with Docker? Docker's a containerization platform. And so that was really what my original thinking was, that if we could port Docker to ArcaOS. What Docker does is it provides you with a virtual machine for running an application. So on Linux, if you have a Docker setup, that Docker setup can be set up to run something like QuickBooks on the Linux desktop. And like you say, Doug, without the Windows borders on or anything, it looks like a native application. And it's running essentially in a container, an operating system that boots up and just runs that one application. It's like, the way you can set your your workplace shell in your config sys as to what your shell is going to be.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It boots up that container to that application, and that's period end.
So it's a VM for just an application.
It's a VM for an
It
application.
is not actually a VM. It's unfortunately highly dependent on Linux kernel application.
Oh, is it?
What it does, it doesn't run in a VM. What it does is it actually creates a sandbox within the within the address space of the operating system, and it kind of creates a containerized file, and it runs on the host CPU, on the host, in a kind of sandbox of the host OS with its complete independent kernel space and environment. But it's not technically a VM, and it
Interesting.
requires that both the file system and the kernel, or at least the memory manager, and I may be getting some of this a bit wrong, I'm only vaguely familiar with how this works. It requires that they have the ability to containerize themselves in that way. That said, there are other ways of doing similar things to
Right.
what Docker does.
Right.
There are virtual machines that will create, borderless
Right,
sessions.
right,
And
right.
so the idea is probably not a bad one to look into, but Docker specifically probably could not be ported unless our kernel has capabilities that I'm not aware of, which
Right,
it
right.
might.
The other interesting side effect of that is, we were talking before about updating the browser in that virtual Linux session. Well, you wouldn't be able to do that if it's in a container,
Yeah.
because you'd need to get a new container with the new version of the application you wanted to run. So there are some downsides to that too, but the concept of running a dedicated session of another operating system's application is really what I'm proposing.
It's like on Windows, there's that Windows Linux, like there's a Linux subsystem.
Windows subsystem for Linux,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So
only,
that is in fact
it's
how
only
Docker
command
runs
line.
on Windows. It has to run inside WSL.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah.
But not a bad idea. I would point out though, and you probably, I'm sure you're aware of this, it wouldn't solve the problem of the 32-bit address space.
No, we're still stuck with 32 bits, and 32 bits is 32 bits,
Yeah.
and that's it. I mean, without PAE, you can't get beyond that. And getting PAE to a point of being functional for something other than the RAM disk is a huge piece of work unto itself.
By the way, that worked. I have like a 4 gig RAM disk.
You have a 4 gig RAM disk
Using the upper memory.
using PAE in
Yeah.
upper memory.
That's in the virtual machine, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I will try that.
Yeah, it's neat. And look, RAM disks used to be a lot more important to us than they are now.
Karaoke time.
Before we had solid state drives, when you had a slow spinning rust drive and you had the availability of a RAM disks were lightning fast.
Yeah.
Now our normal storage is lightning fast, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's not all that it was made out to be before. However, the nice thing is that you save a lot of the wear and tear
Yeah.
on the SSD, because your SSD has a finite lifespan. RAM is different than that. RAM expects to be read and written, erased, read and written. The SSD starts to degrade after you write and erase from it the first time. So you save some of that if you're doing a lot of back and forth stuff. We don't do a lot of swapping anymore. We don't have to, because we have so much memory already. And as we've already discussed, 4 gigs is 4 gigs. So if you've already got 4 gigs in the machine, your swap file will be created, because OS2 by default creates a swap file for itself, unless you tell it no swap. And that's not generally a good idea. Even if you have 4 gigs of RAM available, we just tell people to leave the swapper at its default, and it'll create a 2 meg swap file and just leave it.
Okay, since you brought this up, how about trim?
We do not support trim in our JFS implementation yet. We have a feature request to add trim support, But you can trim the JFS volume from a Linux distribution that has a JFS driver in it. And you can boot back up to ArcaOS to your trimmed JFS, and it should work just fine.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you dual boot, go to Linux, trim it, and then come back.
Boot from a live Linux distribution that's got a JFS driver. Boot from a USB stick.
And the JFS is?
Mount your JFS partition, trim it, and then reboot without the stick.
So the JFS for both of those are interchangeable?
Pretty much.
As long as you configure the Linux side in a certain way. It's more accurate to say that OS2's JFS is kind of a subset of what's possible with Linux JFS, right?
Okay.
That's probably a good way to put it. The Linux JFS driver is going to be backward compatible to the OS2 driver. There's a lot of stuff that Linux uses on JFS that we don't use, like symlink support. Our symlinks are implemented in a very odd way. But on a Linux machine, they're implemented in the file system. So, but that's not anything that's going to be a problem for us, because it's not like taking a disk that's got extended attributes on it and then reading it on a system that doesn't understand extended attributes, saving the file back and blowing away your EAs. You're not going to lose any of that stuff. Linux is just going to see that those things don't exist in the file system and be done with it. But yeah, you can use a Linux distribution to trim the volume, and our driver should be perfectly happy with that. As long as it's shut down cleanly when you're done trimming. You know, if you make a mess of it, then all bets are off when check disk runs. You know.
That's confidence expired.
Exactly. Jeff, you had something you wanted to add?
Just about the RAM disk, I
Yeah.
use it for a particular reason, which I think is still valid.
Yes.
So I create the RAM disk when the machine boots,
Yes.
and I use it as a scratch pad.
Yes.
I have a batch file. As soon as I boot the machine,
Mm-hmm.
I decrypt the file that has all my passwords
Yes.
and everything. I put it on the RAM drive.
Yes.
When
yes.
the machine shuts off,
We do that for a particular enterprise client of ours, where there are encrypted credentials that need to be read by other things on the system. So we decrypt to the RAM disk, and then when the machine reboots, it's clean again. So there is that. Yes, absolutely. It is an added security measure. I'm not going to say a feature, but it's a security measure. Anyone else with anything before I go and check out of the hotel before they charge me for another day? Thank you very much. It's been a very productive roundtable, both parts. It's very informative, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to exchange ideas all the way around the room instead of just listening to me pontificate.
So this is it, we're done?
No, we have.
Oh,
We have the
This is
karaoke.
part of our ad hoc session. I'm going to put up that other slide. And then we have the farewell to Warpstock coming up. So the other slide I'll put up is, okay, so there are 4 slides in this group, and this will be on the Warpstock website for everyone. These are just some links that are available for more information. Okay, so the OS2 World forums for discussion. OS2 World itself is a good site for news. I didn't add the OS2 World Wiki on here, but the OS2 World Wiki is also a good site for information. I should have added that to this list. OS2 Voice. I said links there because originally I pointed this to the links directory, the links page, but OS2 Voice has a tremendous amount of information from prior releases of the Voice newsletter, which has a lot of very good and still relevant information in it. And just poke around the site, you'll find information. Gordon maintains that site, and he's done an excellent job with it. An excellent job. All the links work on the site, and they work under an OS2 browser. So all the nifty menus that fold up and unfold all work. If you're using DFC, the support mailing list is at groups.io now. Yahoo Groups disbanded. Remember, we used to be on eGroups, then we ended up on Yahoo Groups. Then Yahoo decided, no, we're not going to have groups anymore. So they got rid of their groups, and everyone sort of migrated to groups.io. Groups.io is really nice. I will tell you this, that in the latest iteration of their software, I can no longer get CMonkey on OS2 to navigate the groups.io site. I used to be able to do it, and I used to use it because I'm an administrator for a couple of groups there, and I used to be able to do my administration tasks from CMonkey on ArcaOS. I can't do that anymore. Double would, if Double stays up and running, Double would work fine for that, I think. The Warp mailing list that Martin maintains on groups.io is there. More technical information is on the Warp technical subgroup from the Warp groups, the Warp group, I should say.
Are those, like, if you just go to warpgroups.io, you get some kind of front end that lists all these things?
It will, if you go to warp.groups.io, it will take you to warp.groups.io/g/pound or something like that.
Louis, you got less than 15 minutes.
Less than 15 minutes to check out.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go check out before they confiscate my luggage. Then I'll be back during our interim period here, and we can do some more, go over some more of these. All right?
All right.
There's a huge group of people out there supporting the Republican candidate for Senate in Pennsylvania.
Oh, really? Is that the group out here?
Don't get distracted, check out first.
Don't get
Yeah.
distracted.
I'm going
Put the
to check
blinders
out.
on.
You'll have to navigate.
I will be back though.
Free buttons.
Don't bring your checkbook.
Louis,
Alex,
the USB stick you have yesterday, it has both the client and the server on it?
The client and server is it's one executable. So if you run rsync.exe-d, it runs it in daemon mode.
And can I copy from that USB stick?
You may copy from the USB stick.
We'll check it out with him on the forum.
Mount that up.
Yeah, I don't know who's
It
responsible
says
for
rsync. In fact, let me
Yeah,
just look
it's
at it. It
Rex,
says
Rex,
You'll see the rsync zip file.
It's not working.
That's Steve's last build of rsync.
So we're going to reconvene at noon.
Well, we're sort of on lunch break. Lunch is scheduled for noon.
And will we
but-
have the room